John making those copies for us. Handing them out. Apparently I need to make more. I think I made 55 for the next week. Yeah, that's right. For lesson 6 I made 55 and they're all gone too. So. Okay, lesson 7 is 2 pages. So be sure 2 pages. Question number 14. What is a major reason the elders need to be diligent in tending the flock? What's that? Yeah. Yeah, they're going to have to answer for that, for how they give an account. So, although we may think, somebody may use that excuse not to want to be an elder, but they're going to have to answer, they're going to have to give an account. All of us are going to have to give an account. Well, that's right. They've got to answer for that. And Paul said after his departing, grievous wolves were going to enter in, not sparing the flock. So that's the nature of grievous wolves. They don't care about the flock except to devour them, to ruin them, and to keep them following the Lord. And they have no mercy on the flock. They'll enter among you, not sparing the flock. They absolutely don't care about the flock. That is welfare, except to destroy it. How about number 15? How serious was the thing of which Paul was warning? Okay, in other places he names some of the men by name who were leaders in that thing. We talked about Philetus and Hermogenes and some of those others. So in view of that, what did the elders need to do? They needed to watch. What does it mean to watch? Okay, a lot of cities back in Bible times had a watchtower. That's where some religious groups get their name today. They publish a paper called the Watchtower. But they were to watch, and the purpose of a watch, whether they meant well or harm, and people would man those watches around the clock. And so sometimes we read in the Bible of the third watch or the second watch. It's referring to that. They often measured time by the changing of the watch and so forth. So there was always someone watching and to alert those in authority if they thought danger was approaching, or maybe if anybody was approaching, so they could determine that. And that's the idea of elders. They're watching. Doesn't mean they're fault-finding necessarily, but they're watching for danger. And so that is especially true if there's wolves out there. What's a shepherd got to do? And he's got to stay awake sometimes, doesn't he? Got to be on guard. You can't watch if you're asleep. Remember when Jesus, the night of his betrayal, he asked his disciples to watch with him, but they went to sleep? We can't go to sleep when we're on watch. And that means we've got to be alert. And the elders need to do that, be on the lookout. Remember that I warned you about this very thing, he says in verse 31. So when that happened, they were to remember what Paul had said. Paul said this was going to happen. And if they listened to what Paul said, they were ready for that. And it seems to indicate there was some readiness when you read the letter to the church at Ephesus over in the book of Revelation, one of the 7 churches. It appears that they did try those who were apostles, it says. And that leads us into our next question. Is there any reason to believe Paul's teaching and work had helped the Ephesian Christians? It did, yeah. They knew of his sacrifice, and they knew about the danger that he faced. They knew what had already happened to him in the past, some of the terrible things that happened. They knew the tears he shed. They knew that he was making tents to support himself and also those who were working with him. He supported them. And he commended them to God. That is, he entrusted them to God. He believed that they were ready for that. And is there any reason to believe that his warnings ever happened? Okay, we've indicated that by the letter to the 7 churches. Let's take a look at that, Revelation chapter 2. It's addressed to the church at Ephesus. He says, to the angel of the church in Ephesus, write, these things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, he that walketh in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. I know thy works, and thy toil and patience, and that thou canst not bear evil men. So, yes, his teaching had had an effect. He said, I know that you can't bear evil men, and just try them that call themselves apostles, and they are not, and just find them false. So the church at Ephesus was doing its job according to what Paul had told them they needed to do. And they're being committed here by the Lord for that. And thou hast patience and didst bear for my name's sake, and hast not grown weary. So all these things are good. There's a whole list of good things he says about them, and I think we can trace a lot of that back to Paul's teaching to them in Acts 20 and before that. But verse 4, but I have this against thee, that thou dost leave thy first love. What's that tell us? Okay, you can be doing the right things and not have a proper attitude, can you? Yeah, it's got to be love motivating you and keeping you going. It can't be absent. And yet they left their first love. They were going through the motions, and that can happen to any church. It's not just something 2,000 years ago that happened to the church at Ephesus. It can happen to us. It can happen to any congregation. I've seen churches that I thought kind of fit that description, even in our time. Let's go ahead and finish reading there. He says, I have against thee that thou hast left thy first love. Remember, therefore, whence thou art fallen. So what's that tell us? They had fallen to a point that he said, you've fallen. They're not just leaning or tottering, they've fallen. So can a church fall away and still be doing all the right things, it seems like? Can. So we must not only be right in what we teach, we need to be right in our attitude, don't we? And we need to be right in our love for the Lord. And so he says, verse 5, remember therefore whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works, or else I come to thee, and will move thy candlestick out of its place, except thou repent. So candlestick was kind of the endorsement. He's going to remove their light. They won't be recognized by him anymore. Verse 6, but this thou hast, that thou hatest the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. We don't know much about the Nicolaitans. I remember hearing people say, well, that refers to people that lay a nickel in the plate, but I don't think that's true. I don't think there's anything to that. Which I also hate. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. To him that overcometh, to him will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So he kind of switches from the church there to the individual, to him that overcometh. That's not talking about the church entirely. He's talking about the individuals that make it up. That's going to happen too. It's going to have to be from their hearts. So that that's right. They're to love the church. We're to seek the kingdom. We're to love Christ's body, his bride, his family, all of those different figures, kingdom, for which the church is referred to in the New Testament. Okay, number 16, is there any reason? Well, that's the one we asked. Number 17, how long had Paul worked with these brethren? 3 years, and to what extent? He kept back nothing that was profitable, to that extent. The whole counsel of God, that's right. So he didn't leave out anything that needed to be said. And that's how he could say, I'm pure from the blood of all men. There was the fact that he had kept back nothing that was profitable for them. So he taught them publicly and privately. He kept back nothing that was profitable. He declared the whole counsel of God. He lived among them. And when you read verses 34 and 35, let me get back to Acts 20. Somebody have that one to read 34 and 35 for us? Acts 20. I think that's the verses I want. Yeah, he says, "Ye yourselves know that these hands ministered unto my necessities, and to them that were with me. In all things I gave you an example, that so laboring ye ought to help the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, It is more blessed to give than to receive." So he even reminded them something that's not recorded in the Gospels, didn't he? But apparently it was a well-known thing, because he says he's reminding them of it, so they already knew it. And last question, what indicates that Paul's speech had an effect on the Ephesian elders? Okay, and what we just read in that letter to the church at Ephesus in Revelation 2, there's a whole list of good things he says about them before he says, I have this fault with you. And look at verses 36 through 38. And when he had thus spoken, he kneeled down and prayed with them all, and they all wept sore, and fell on Paul's neck and kissed him, sorrowing most of all for the word which he had spoken, that they should behold his face no more. And they brought him on his way unto the ship. So it was a sad departing, and knowing what was going to happen to Paul, and knowing that they wouldn't see him again, were certainly reasons for that. Any comments or question about Lesson 5? Lesson 6, we're going to go ahead and include that, still dealing with the Ephesian elders, but we'll conclude with that on that lesson whenever we finish it. And several things we can think about it as we kind of do an overview of this passage in Acts 20. And the warning about grievous wolves, I think I've mentioned in here before, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. I mentioned that not because it's a fable, and it is a fable, not on the par with the scriptures at all, not inspired, but it points out a lesson that is actually pointed out in the scriptures. And the scriptures are older than Little Red Riding Hood, but let's notice it. That's kind of a European fable. Dates back to the 16th century, so back in the 1500s. And it revolves around a little girl who's wearing a red hooded cape, kind of a hoodie type thing. And she's walking through the woods, going to deliver food to her grandmother who is sick. And she's been told by her grandmother not to leave the path, to go follow the path all the way. And there's a wolf, surprisingly. She hadn't been watching for a wolf. But there's a wolf that appears. Specifically, he's called the Big Bad Wolf. And initially, he wants the food in her basket, and he approaches her and asks her where she's going. And so he's asking questions. He's trying to find out information. And she naively tells him that she's on the way to deliver food to her sick grandmother. And the wolf suggests that she pick some flowers to take with her on the way and give them to her grandmother. And while she's picking the flowers, he goes to the grandmother's house and gains entry by pretending to be Little Red Riding Hood. He dresses up in a red cape, and of course you got to have an imagination and all that. And he swallows the grandmother whole. Imagine that. And he's called the Big Bad Wolf for a reason. And I think we can see that. And he waits for the girl, and this time he's disguised as her grandmother. And when Red Riding Hood arrives there, she notices that her grandmother seems very strange, and she says, "What a deep voice you have." And you remember that story when you were a kid. And he said, "The better to greet you with." And she said, what big eyes you have. And he said, the better to see you with. And what big hands you have, the better to embrace you with. All of these questions and answers. Take there. And lastly, what a big mouth you have, she says. And he says, the better to eat you with. And he responds by that. And that point, the wolf jumps out of bed and devours her too. That's the story. What was the purpose of that story in telling that to little kids? Yeah, imagine going to bed on that. Yeah, now go to sleep. Yeah, I never have understood that part. But the lesson is given to children not to trust strangers, and be careful about answering questions they ask you, because he was gaining information there, and not to accept advice from strangers, because his advice was a device to sidetrack her. Go pick some flowers. What a nice thing to do for my grandmother. And she does that. That's when he's doing his dirty work, while she's doing that. So the Bible record, a warning about wolves attacking the church, and like that classic fable, it's used to distract. And wolves often do that. They distract by various means and deception. He had a disguise on. What's the Bible tell us about false teachers? They can present themselves as angels of light, can't they? They can look like what they're not. And so that's the kind of thing we learn from that. And he lures her off of the pathway, even though her grandmother had told her not to leave the path. But she listened to the wolf. That's kind of been the history of mankind. God has told us, warned us about certain things, but then we listen to somebody else. Eve, God had told her, don't eat of the fruit. And so she listened to somebody else and followed what they said. And that's always a mistake. And that was in her case too. So we're taught to beware of the wolves. And Jesus even warned that. He called them, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. I think I've got a picture somewhere. We'll go through these kind of quickly. Encourage one another and build each other up. Encourage one another. And this passage, I wanted to mention this. Paul, I'll go back to that a minute. When Paul said he was pure from the blood of all men, he said, that's kind of a reference to Ezekiel chapter 3. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thy hand. It's not up there? Is it not working? Pardon? I didn't hear what you said. It's mine? I've got... What, am I not plugged in? Yeah. I don't know what's going on here. Showing up on my screen. Anything else I need to do to it? Don't know. Okay, well, got a technical difficulty. Anyway, we've got Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 18 through 21 on the screen, and I'll just go ahead and finish reading it. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. Again, when a righteous man doth turn from his righteousness, and commit iniquity, and I lay a stumbling block before him, he shall die. Because thou hast not given him warning, he shall die in his sin, and his righteous deed shall he, which he hath done, shall not be remembered, but his blood will I require at thy hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the righteous man, that the righteous sin not, and he doth not sin, he shall surely live, because he took warning, and thou hast delivered thy soul. So, here we go. There it is. Presto. Wasn't anything I did. Right there. Okay, look at verse 3 in Hebrews chapter 13. Should be 13, 17. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit to them, for they watch in behalf of your souls, as they that shall give account. They may do this with joy and not with grief, for this were unprofitable for you. So God has designed a cure to protect us against wolves. And this is it right here. And it's an important responsibility. And we've emphasized the danger of the wolves, and to remember that they're not going to look like wolves. Yes, John?
Well, in your fable, the wolf was convincing enough that grandmother let him in.
Yeah.
And Paul warning the Corinthians said, such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. So they're pretty convincing.
Yeah. We kind of fall for that too. We don't, sometimes we don't believe that. When you see a picture of the devil, what's it usually look like? Horns, tail, pitchfork, mean looking. Anybody ever seen the devil look like that? We're not going to see him look like that. He's going to look pleasing, pleasant, inviting. And that's the warning we have here. Don't expect false teachers to have a scowl on their face and all of that. They're going to look innocent. And Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And there's one right there in the middle. Jesus said they come as wolves in sheep's clothing. Well, a sheep is innocent and pretty well harmless, unless you get one of those big rams with the horns on them. But they're pretty harmless, and sheep are not real smart for common sense. I don't know if we parallel ourselves there or not, but sometimes they're not. And somebody depicted a cartoon like this. Here's these wolves. Wait a minute, anyone here real sheep? Well, they're all wolves in sheep's clothing. And so you never know. You never know what it's going to be like. And that doesn't mean you're supposed to suspect everybody, but you've just got to be alert. You've got to watch. And that's particularly what the elders were told to do in that passage. And we're going to get to some pictures here about Ephesus before we go too far. I have this book, a real good book on Ephesus, yesterday and today, and it has a lot of the pictures of the ruins in Ephesus. I'll go through these kind of quick, but it shows you that Ephesus was a very thriving metropolis in its day, and had stone streets, so it wasn't a dirt road or anything like that. And you can see what were parts of buildings that were all along the way, all kinds of shopping places, and there's the big stadium there, the big Coliseum, or whatever you want to call it. And it would seat over 50, I've forgotten how many it seated. I'm thinking it was over 50, maybe 25,000. Anyway, it's a big thing, a lot of people there, and they apparently had discovered the secret to putting it in the right place for the acoustics, because they didn't have PA systems back then. But apparently it could be heard throughout the theater, or be no point in going to it if you're not going to be able to hear what's said. But it's still there. It's been uncovered by the archaeologists, and still a big, impressive site. And let me go back here. I need to. Okay, yeah, that one next. And then this one is the picture of the library. So they had libraries back then. Didn't have books as we know them, but they had scrolls and parchments and animal skins, and things of that nature. And another view of it there. And there's a kind of an artist drawing of it in its heyday. So very impressive. And this was the city where Paul went to, and apparently may have been in that very place where he was in danger by the ones who rose up against him and said he's ruining our business. And there's another view there. So all of these show us what Ephesus must have been like. A very big city in its time, estimated well over 100,000 people. So big in its time, and had a lot of things they did to the glory of Diana, the goddess of the Ephesians. And that's kind of the end of that. So anyway, as we think about Ephesus and try to get acquainted, and there's even more pictures in this book if you want to take a look at some of those. But it shows us that men were probably far more progressive than we realized they were at that time. Even though they didn't have electricity and things that we have access to, they were still on the ball in a lot of ways. But let's go now to our next lesson where we talk about Red Riding Hood. And we talk about deception. And we'll get to a question on that here in just a minute. Find my questions here. Find my place. Okay, there it is. Okay, let's look at our questions on the next lesson. We've kind of started that already, and I showed you these slides. And the first question, how does Paul describe his time serving the Ephesian church? Humility. Okay, so we're not to mistake the things that he says about himself as bragging. He just didn't have any other choice to point them to. And he uses himself, and he's not bragging, because many places we find that Paul says he is the least of the apostles, which are not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. And so Paul is not being braggadocio here in this particular passage, but he's given us warnings. Also, he said he did it with tears and with trials. It wasn't easy going. There were struggles and trials to deal with along the way. And it takes a person who has determination, who has the willpower, who wants to do the right thing, and not giving up. That's Paul. Trials aren't going to stop him. He keeps on keeping on. And what does Paul say he did without hesitation? We've mentioned that before. Okay, and he proclaimed the gospel, the truth of the gospel, without hesitation and thoroughly. He did that. And why does Paul warn the elders to keep watch over yourselves? Take heed unto yourselves. Okay, they're the first defense, aren't they? In the line, they're the first defense. So make sure the first defense is ready. If the first defense is not ready, what's going to happen to the rest? They're not going to be ready either because they haven't been warned. And so they're the first defense. Keep watch unto yourselves, because problems were going to rise among the eldership. That's a kind of problem that no eldership wants. And elders, a lot of times it's a challenge dealing with problems among the flock, but dealing with problems among the eldership itself is a very difficult situation and hard to solve and keep things together. So he first tells them to take a look at yourselves. And while some might look at that and say, well, that's discouraging. I don't want to be an elder if it's got to do that. Christians are supposed to do that too. We're to take heed to ourselves. We're told several times to take heed for this or for that. Another way of saying the same thing. And number 5, what does the phrase savage wolves likely mean in this context? He says, okay, they're not pet wolves, are they? I don't think you can make a pet out of a wolf, can you? There was that movie, Dancing with Wolves. He kind of did, but that was kind of an exception. Yeah, they lead you astray because they're going to pretend not to be wolves. They're going to pretend to be something else. And so they're savage. And the elders are like shepherds overseeing the flock against that. David, remember, protected the flock, not against wolves, but against what? A lion and a bear. So wolves aren't the only predators out there for the flock, are they? They can come in different shapes and sizes and different degrees of danger, I think we could say. But these predators want to devour the sheep where they're no longer useful anymore. We mentioned that Paul states he's innocent of the blood of all men. And in terms of the elder's responsibility, we showed that from Ezekiel 18 and Hebrews 13, that they give an account for their watching over the flock. But the next one, how does Paul feel about material possessions? Yeah? Yeah, Paul was prepared to leave on a moment's notice and go to heaven if he was called to do so. But he said he was in a strait betwixt the two, whether to stay there with them because of his need to help them or whether to go and be with the Lord. So kind of a catch-22 situation for Paul. And notice in verse 33 and 34, of Acts 20, I coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. Ye yourselves know that these hands ministered unto my necessities and to them that were with me. In all things I give you an example. And he cites the Lord there, saying, more blessed to give than to receive. Paul was an example of what the Lord said there. He was giving and not into the receiving except for what he needed. And he praised the church at Philippi for sending again to his necessity, for the necessary things. So what does he, excuse me?
I just started saying, don't you think we as people should be more like that? It seems like, as a society, it's what all can you get? What can you get? How much money can you spend? How much money can you make?
Yeah.
It's all about material things and not looking for putting that treasure in heaven. It's all about how much more can I get?
That's right. That's where we need to be focused, isn't it? And so much of the time we start going after the almighty dollar. Somebody had a drawing or a cartoon. I used to run it in the bulletin. It shows a big dollar sign, a huge dollar sign, and people bowing down to it. Well, that's not really the way we do it because that's easy to see that. But when our first priority is about material things, we've got to have the latest this, the latest that. And anytime something new comes out, I've got to have that. I've got to be on top of the situation. Got to be the first to get it and all that. That's being misdirected. We're focusing on things that are not going to benefit us. They're only tied to this world. Not a one of those things that we prize so heavily are we going to take with us to heaven.
It's all just stuff. And when we die, that stuff is just going to stay here for somebody else to either deal with it or throw it away or
Yeah.
because it's just stuff.
I keep being reminded of that by my family. And that's true. We're not going to take any of it with us. The things that we prize most highly, physical things, are going to perish, as the Bible teaches. And so verse 24, if we ask, what does he prioritize? Verse 24 says, but I hold not my life of any account as dear unto myself, so that I may accomplish my course and the ministry which I have received from the Lord Jesus, to testify the gospel of the grace of God. That's the most important thing to him. And I believe we begin to realize, probably the older we get and the closer we get to the end of our lives, that there's really one thing that's important, and our bucket list grows smaller and smaller of the things we want to accomplish. All of us have things we'd like to do, places we'd like to go and see things, and I think of some of those things, but the older we get, the smaller that list gets, to where going to heaven is the only thing in the bucket. And it should be that way earlier than we often put it, but it should always be there as the most important thing in our bucket list. Number 8, Paul quotes Jesus as more blessed to give than to receive. How should an elder reflect this attitude? Okay, it's not something that just starts when you become an elder, does it? It's something all Christians are to do. It's what? Yeah. That's right. And so Paul's attitude shows us how we should feel. So we have to prioritize things. We do that about things in this life. We prioritize things. But here's the most important place where we need to prioritize. And serving God and his people with a pure and selfless heart, which is what Paul did, rather than being known for our attachment to material things, or some material accomplishment. And that's the way life is. But Paul was not seeking personal gain in the least, John.
I was glad that you brought up also that Paul not only gave by working to provide for him and those with him, but he also received, because it is impossible to give unless someone receives. And most of us know, maybe we feel this way ourselves, I'm glad to help others, but I don't need anything. How can I help you? Oh, I don't need anything. And in reality, we do. And they can't give if we don't receive.
That's right. Everybody needs help in some way. So with Paul and with elders, not about seeking personal gain or status. And this warning in relationship to elders may have something to do with what Paul tells Timothy, that elders are worthy of support. And they can be supported by the church. And it is anything that's subject to abuse. Same thing for preachers, it's subject to abuse. Number 9, how did the Ephesian elders react to Paul's farewell? They fell on his neck, kissing him, and the Greek word there is repeatedly. They were kissing him repeatedly. That was a form of greeting and affection, and weeping that they would see him no more, it says. What does that reveal about their relationship? They had a good relationship. It showed a bond of love and attachment. Nothing wrong with having that bond. We hear people warn about something called preacheritis. What's that? Well, it's when people have a favorite preacher. It's what the church at Corinth had. Some said, I'm a Paul and I'm a Apollos. Yes, Teddy?
This reflects the family relationship there, other than the relationship of acquaintance to acquaintance, more than friend to friend. And this is family to family. The way we would react if some of our family is leaving and we don't want to see them. And I think that's what we have to do.
I believe so too. So they had captured the family concept of the church. And it's interesting how many different relationships the church is depicted. As we mentioned, a kingdom a while ago and a body and all that. It's a family, of whom the whole family of heaven and earth is named. Ephesians 3:15. Ephesians is all about the church, book of Ephesians. And so it showed a bond of love and attachment. They had captured the family concept of the church. And we need to do that. Did I see another hand? I thought somebody's hand was up. Okay, in your own words, what is the most important responsibility of an elder? Okay, I believe that's it. Being a shepherd, watching in behalf. They're doing it in someone's behalf of the souls that they must give an account. So we might call them bodyguards. They're bodyguards. They're there to help us, protect us. You think about, we talk about being influenced by grievous wolves and things that can happen to us and all of that danger. I was reading something not long ago about a group many of you know about, the Beach Boys. They were popular back in the 60s and 70s and may still be performing, I don't know. But in his book, Good Vibrations, Mike Love, who was the founder of the Beach Boys, he recounts how his cousin, Dennis Wilson, who died in 1983, who urged him to join them for a party and to meet their spiritual guru. At the time, he was spiritually curious, and of course it didn't hurt that the girls were very attractive. The party was an LSD party, and the spiritual guru was Charles Manson. We used to offer free coffee mugs to first-time guests, but Manson orchestrated sexual partners for everyone present, especially first-time guests. Love, that's Mike Love, described Dennis Wilson as the shy, introverted guy in school that never really dated, and that seemed as if Manson intuitively knew this and tapped into parts of Dennis that made it all too enticing. Fortunately for Wilson, he got into a heated argument with Manson and never went back. Well, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. I'm sure Manson didn't come across as the real person that he was. He came across as something else. That's how he attracted people to him, how he got a following. That's how cult leaders work. That's how Jim Jones, that's how David Koresh and some of those others have drawn a crowd to them. They had that personality that attracted people. And, of course, inwardly they were ravening wolves, like the Bible says.
Today on some of the preachers that are on TV too.
True. That's true. I guess the bell's already rung. So we'll stop there. And we pretty well finished that. I think we had one more question. We'll get